Sudan has been in the grip of a vicious civil war for over 2 years, but the fall of the Sudanese Army's main base in the western city of El-Fasher has been described by the UN Secretary-General as a major escalation that will add to the unbearable suffering of civilians. The Sudanese Armed Forces control most of the north and east of the country, including the capital Khartoum. The paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, now claim to have captured El-Fasher, giving them control of Darfur, where they aim to form a rival government. Triumphant RSF forces have already uploaded videos of summary executions, with fears of further atrocities to come. A warning, this report from Jonathan Rugman contains distressing images and details.
Fleeing for their lives through the killing fields of Darfur, destination unknown. Thousands of civilians escaping the latest brutal battle in Sudan's civil war. This victory filmed by the victorious, as wars often are, the Rapid Support Forces who now control Western Sudan. This is a gift for our martyrs, says the soldier filming this. This is a gift for our commanders who didn't give up. Yesterday, these jubilant Arab fighters filmed the capture of the last major army outpost in the west, in the city of El-Fasher, apparently sealing the division of the third biggest country in Africa after 2.5 years of civil war, with over 40,000 killed so far. The RSF's deputy commander, Abdul Rahim Dagalo, told his men not to loot or target civilians, to go home to their families. But after a siege lasting over 500 days, to the victors the spoils, and now a new phase of terrifying retribution has begun. Outside El-Fasher, the RSF filmed their military trucks menacing Darfuris, all of them black Africans trying to escape. "Get out," shouts an Arab commander. "Kill them," he says. And a trench is now scattered with dead bodies, raising fears that a massacre may have taken place. The RSF film these prisoners on the ground, and then they shoot them. These soldiers surely indicting themselves of war crimes, and by filming this, by posting it on social media, they show they don't care.
The pattern of RSF behavior is one of egregious violations of international humanitarian law. And that has taken the form of direct executions, so effectively collective punishment of an entire population. So direct executions of individuals, shelling of neighborhoods, homes, civilian infrastructure, and of course siege warfare. So effectively cutting off supply lines of water, of food, of medicines, of the essentials to survive.
The men entering El-Fasher may look scarily familiar to the 250,000 people still living there. That's because they're the descendants of the Janjaweed militia who committed atrocities here more than 20 years ago. Though it wasn't until this month that the International Criminal Court found a Janjaweed commander guilty of crimes against humanity more than 20 years after the event. At the weekend, Algoni Dagalo, a younger brother of the RSF's commander, was filmed sitting in the lobby of a hotel in Washington, D.C. The Americans say he's the head of weapons procurement, though his presence here suggests the Trump administration is trying to broker a ceasefire. Back in Darfur, Dagalo's fighters are now holding hundreds of prisoners at gunpoint. They're all criminals, says the man in charge. And there was no mercy shown to those killed here, with the latest round of ethnic cleansing perhaps only just beginning.
Well, as Jonathan just said, efforts to find a peace deal in Sudan have been going on in Washington, D.C., where the Sudanese foreign minister has been leading a delegation. The Trump administration and Egypt have also been holding talks with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, the two principal backers of the rival factions in the civil war. Our US editor, Anushka Astana, joins us now from the capital. Anushka.
Thank you. When I speak to experts in the region, they say that this horrific war in Sudan has been remarkably resistant to peacemaking efforts, and there wasn't much hope about US involvement previously. They say that the Biden administration cared about Sudan, but it was very low priority. The envoy didn't even report into the White House, but there is a sense that under Trump things could be changing. I was speaking to Alan Boswell, the Horn of Africa director at the International Crisis Group. He speaks to lots of those involved in peacemaking efforts in the region, and he says all of them want to grab Donald Trump's attention. And there are three reasons why they think things could be different. The first is the envoy, Masad Boulos, who wants to make a mark in that role and also happens to be the father-in-law of Tiffany Trump, the president's daughter. So he does have that line into the White House. The second is those Arab countries that you're talking about are growing their relations with the US under Donald Trump. And then the third is that desire the president has for a Nobel Peace Prize. He is touring Asia at the moment, and we've heard it there again. Yes, he's been talking about a Chinese trade deal, but yesterday in Malaysia, he oversaw a signing of an agreement between Cambodia and Thailand. Thailand didn't go as far as calling it a peace deal as the president had, but the Cambodians said they would nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize. After that, Trump boarded a plane to Japan, where he is now, and he spoke about this.
I mean, I just solved 8 wars and a 9th is coming. I believe Russia-Ukraine will happen. But we just did, we just left it. When you look at the treaty we just did, that was a war that was thousands of people were already shot at the border. And when you look at what we just did, was pretty amazing. It was quite a great peace treaty. But that was one of 8, and makes me feel good. I mean, it's millions of people that we saved. I saved the lives of millions of people.
So are hopes in Washington high that this new peacemaker Trump can make a difference?
Well, given the scenes that, our viewers have just seen, there is obviously a lack of hope right now when it comes to Sudan. And look, the US was part of the quad of countries that actually put forward a pathway to peace in September. The problem being the two armed players that you've been talking about either rejected or ignored it. Now, you talked about that meeting on Friday, and there is more hope that some sort of plan for a humanitarian pause, at least, could still be on the table, with both sides actually engaging in it. I spoke about that expert, Alan Boswell. He said to me, I don't think it is all hopeless, but the one thing that there is worry about in Sudan is what is America's strategic interest there. If you think about another conflict, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, there were lucrative mining contracts that have potential for America. The worry is that they will pay interest in Sudan, but ultimately decide that there isn't enough strategic worth for the US.
Anushka Astana in Washington. Well, joining me now from Nairobi is Kholood Khair, the director of Confluence Advisory, a think tank founded in Khartoum, which prioritizes work on policies relating to peace and security, governance and the economy. Thank you for joining me. Can you begin first by telling me what you're hearing about what is clearly a very distressing scene on the ground?
Thanks, Christian. And it's very difficult to get a sense from people on the ground, civilians on the ground in El-Fasher, about what's going on, because there's been a telecommunications blackout in the city and across vast parts of Sudan for over a year and a half now. And it's, El-Fasher has been under siege for over 500 days. And so information was very difficult to get at. What we do have, and what many of your viewers have seen, are those ghastly videos showing heinous and horrific scenes of ethnic cleansing and mass killing by the RSF.
Right, and so when you see these hopes of America brokering some kind of ceasefire, what do you think of them?
So the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, had a delegation staying at the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., as these events, as these murders, as these killings were taking place. The RSF has often used international mediation, international talks as political cover to really mete out the worst violence that we have seen. And unfortunately has proven reasonably successful. They get a pat on the back for being at those talks. They get sort of the worst acts not forgiven, but certainly explained away through dull bureaucratic talk. So what is happening right now is that we're probably going to see an increase in violent acts on the ground in Darfur, particularly as people leave, as people are being targeted for leaving. We're going to see government officials from the North Darfur government, as well as journalists and other activists and others being targeted over the next few days and weeks by the RSF, with no sign of any movement in the international side other than empty words.
Now, the humanitarian situation in Sudan is horrific, and in the neighboring countries where millions of people have fled. I mean, so the idea of a humanitarian pause, well, I mean, it doesn't mean very much, does it, at the moment? I mean, people have got literally nothing there.
Well, the point is that, there are still 260,000 people or so in El-Fasher, half of whom, according to the United Nations, are children. So humanitarian pause would be useful. However, we just started the dry season, and neither the Sudanese Armed Forces nor the RSF have shown any indication of will to have a humanitarian pause, to commit to a humanitarian pause anytime soon. So this is really poorly timed diplomacy that brings not enough leverage on the table to really get these two sides to commit to a ceasefire. But even if they commit to a ceasefire, there are many militias on either side, 17 on the army side, 7 on the RSF side. There's no sense that the army and the RSF can command their allied militias to stop the fighting. And local conflict dynamics, particularly in places like Darfur, are often the ones that motivate much of the violence. So this is a multi-systemic conflict that is only really being dealt with at the international level on one level.
And what is the Sudanese government's role here? Because they are also a bloc on humanitarian support for many of the people there.
Absolutely. There's been a block on humanitarian aid getting into Darfur. Many aid workers privately speak of a sort of under the table sort of deal between the government in Port Sudan and the United Nations, effectively with the United Nations agreeing not to bring aid into Darfur in order to appease the government in Port Sudan, in order to get access to visas and permits in other parts of the country. But the Sudanese Armed Forces has been fighting wars mostly against the people of Sudan for decades. And, starvation, siege, etc. These are the hallmarks of the warfare that they've been fighting. And the RSF is, as a former partner to the Sudanese Armed Forces, carrying out exactly the kind of violence that they carried out together 20 years ago during the Darfur genocide. And so what we're seeing here is a sort of culmination of different factors related to how the Sudanese Armed Forces and its militias fight wars in Sudan, stopping aid, siege, famine and starvation, which has been declared in El-Fasher last year. And we're seeing this all effectively culminate in a war against civilians, where it's civilians that are really being harmed by the conflict rather than the two armed sides.
And do you think we are headed for another division, another partition of Sudan?
Well, one could very easily argue that we already have a de facto partition in Sudan, and the takeover of El-Fasher by the RSF merely catalyzes that or cements it to some degree. But Sudan anyway does not have just 4 main armed groups. It has and not just 2 main armed groups, excuse me, but 4. So actually this will hasten, catalyze the fragmentation of Sudan across the board.
Kholood Khair, thank you very much indeed.